Hello, in this video we're going to talk about glomerulonephritis and we are focusing on nephrotic syndromes. Remember, nephrotic syndrome is where you have the classic triad of signs and symptoms, which is hypercholesterolemia, hypoalbuminemia, proteinuria greater than 3.5 grams in 24 hours, and peripheral edema. This is all a result of kidney damage, specifically the damage to the functional units of the kidneys called nephrons. Now, the damaged nephrons usually filter things out to make up urine. This urine contains, unfortunately, the unwanted proteins and sometimes blood, hematuria. The site that is damaged in nephrotic syndrome is at the head of the nephron, where blood vessels go to filter things into the tubule part of the nephron. And this area is called the glomerulus. So here is the tube of the nephron, the Bowman's capsule, which is the head of the nephron. The glomerulus is a group of vessels that come from the afferent arteriole, which is bringing blood into the nephron. And the blood vessels leaving the nephron is the efferent arteriole, which later will essentially form the renal vein. To understand nephrotic syndrome and the different types, we need to revise the anatomy of the head of the nephron. So let us cut a cross-section of the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. To orientate ourselves, the head of the nephron itself is made up of special cells called parietal cells, and these are essentially squamous epithelial cells, which forms the Bowman's capsule. In the Bowman's capsule is the glomerulus, the group of blood vessels that are all wind up together. The vessels are made up of fenestrated endothelium, which allow for filtration. Surrounding the fenestrated endothelium is the glomerular basement membrane. Then, surrounding the basement membrane are cells called podocytes with their foot projections. The podocytes are important because, in a way, they help with the filtering process. They help by maintaining the integrity and structure of the glomerulus. Then, of course, around the vessel, around the podocytes, you have the Bowman's capsule, which houses the glomerulus. So you can say the deepest layer is the fenestrated endothelium of the vessel, which contains, within it the blood and other blood stuff. And moving out, so going to the next layer, we have the glomerular basement membrane, or GBM. Then we have the podocyte and its foot projections, the Bowman's capsule, and finally the parietal cells that houses the glomerulus. Let us pull one of these vessels out, and as you can see, the podocytes are surrounding it with the foot projections. Then below it is the glomerular basement membrane, and then the fenestrated endothelium, the most inner layer. And within the blood vessel, we can find proteins and we can find red blood cells. Another important cell in this area are the mesangial cells, here in blue, which you can think of as contractile cells that help regulate the blood flow in the area. And in some conditions, in some nephrotic conditions, these cells are affected. Let us now look at a section of the glomerulus and see the layers again in a different view. So normally you have the fenestrated endothelium here. Above it, again, is the glomerular basement membrane. Then you have the podocytes and the surrounding Bowman's capsule. Red blood cells and other proteins around this area cannot get filtered. Red blood cells cannot get filtered because they are way too big for the capillaries, the fenestrated endothelium. The proteins cannot get filtered because, one, they are still too big, and two, The podocytes prevent protein from passing through. The podocytes does this because it has negatively charged surface, which repels the negatively charged protein ions. In nephrotic syndrome, there is essentially injury to the podocytes due to many reasons, mainly either from immune complex deposition or complement protein activation, which leads to subsequent damage. The proteins that are not usually able to pass through these layers can now pass through towards the Bowman's capsule and into the tubule, leading to proteinuria. Sometimes blood can even get through if the damaged area also includes the glomerular basement membrane and the capillaries. So that was an overview of what happens in nephrotic syndrome. You have immune complex and complement proteins leading to damage to the podocytes, which normally would prevent protein from getting through. But there are different types of nephrotic syndromes, and these types of nephrotic syndromes can be divided into primary or secondary nephrotic syndromes. The main primary nephrotic syndromes are minimal change disease, membranous glomerulonephritis, and focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. Secondary nephrotic, as the name suggests, occurs because of another disease or another cause. Common examples include systemic lupus erythematosus, diabetic nephropathy, amyloidosis, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and HIV. If there is an exam question, what is the most common cause of chronic kidney disease? The answer is diabetic nephropathy. If there is a question, what is the most common nephrotic syndrome? The answer is diabetic nephropathy. Diabetic nephropathy will be hopefully discussed in another video, but it's very important to be aware of this condition. We will focus on primary nephrotic syndromes, beginning with minimal change disease. Minimal change disease causes the majority, 70 to 90% of nephrotic syndrome in childhood. Renal biopsy shows minimal change in light microscopy, hence the name. Immunofluorescence shows occasional IgM immunoglobulin in the mesangium. Electron microscopy shows effacement of podocyte foot processes and cells. So here we have the capillary vessel, the glomerular basement membrane, and the podocyte effacement, and you can see loss of foot projections. The loss of foot projections allows protein from the glomerulus to be filtered through and enter the Bowman's capsule and into the tubule. Next, membranous glomerulonephritis. It accounts for 30% of nephrotic syndromes in adults. Renal biopsy shows in light microscopy mesangial expansion and capillary wall thickening. Immunofluorescence shows IgG and complement 3 protein. Electron microscopy will reveal glomerular basement membrane thickening. So drawing it out, again here we have the endothelial wall and surrounding it a thick glomerular basement membrane. Then surrounding the glomerulus there are subepithelial deposits of immunocomplexes formed by, as mentioned, complement 3, C3, and IgG. These are termed spikes because they look like spikes on electron microscopy. So they deposit here, filling in the spaces within the glomerulus, forming these spikes. The immune deposits actually damages the podocytes and the foot projections. And because there's damaged podocytes, proteins that were previously unable to pass through are filtered through from the glomerulus into the Bowman's capsule and into the nephron's tubule. Last type of primary nephrotic syndrome we're going to talk about is focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. Renal biopsy, the light microscopy will show focal segmental sclerosis of the glomerulus. Immunofluorescence will not really show anything, and electron microscopy can reveal glomerular basement membrane thickening. Again, drawing it out, we have a thickened glomerular basement membrane and sclerosis of a focal area, which actually results after some time in a decrease in urine output because of the decreased infiltration to parts of the glomerulus. Further, the sclerosis can damage surrounding podocytes, contributing to proteinuria.